When you have a team member who isn't performing, when do you double down and coach them to success? And when do you make the hard decision to move on? This is one of the things we're talking about today with John Pellett. John joins us with 21 years of sales and sales leadership experience with a variety of technology companies, spanning some of the most disruptive players in the technology industry. John gained early career experience selling public sector and federal government at companies like Oracle and Salesforce when the public sector was buying cloud-based software for the first time. Later, John moved into commercial sales leadership with Workday and most recently Sprinklr. Having built and rebuilt teams multiple times in all sectors of these transformational hypergrowth companies, John has an up-close and personal perspective on building high-performing sales teams in some of the most competitive markets. These experiences and learnings have led to consistent and sustained success across multiple companies, technologies, and trends. John, thanks for joining us today.
Absolutely, Lucas. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
What else should we know about you? How did you get started in software sales?
How to get started? I guess when I graduated college, I actually had a degree in sports business, and I thought I would be Jerry Maguire, as probably everyone else that had that major with me. Turns out I was just pulling a tarp on minor league fields, so it wasn't quite the glamorous job I thought. If you're in New York, you get into finance, or LA, you're in entertainment. If you're in Northern Virginia, which is roundabout where I grew up, it was a big technology boom. So I had a couple people that said, hey, you should come here. You can make a lot of money and get into sales. That led me back up to Northern Virginia and my first technology job, which was a small startup, cutting my teeth, writing proposals and proposal responses and RFP questions and things like that. So that's how I got into it.
I mentioned in the intro, you worked at Salesforce selling into government and public sector. I imagine that the public sector, the cloud was something really foreign to them at the time. What were some of the challenges in those early days?
At the time, I think, give or take, Salesforce was probably about 500 million in revenue, maybe a little more, I know somewhere around there. But it was actually an old leader of mine recruited me from Oracle and said, hey, we're going to stash this public sector thing under commercial and see what happens, see if we can grow it. And that was my background the previous 3 years or so. So I was like, great, we'll go do that. But at the time, Salesforce wasn't the name everyone knows now. It was .com. The only product that we sold at the time was called, what was it? I think it was like Sales CRM in the cloud. That was the name of the product. Just couple problems, even with the name of the product in itself. Sales, right? The government, there's no VPs of sales, more or less, that we're selling to. And then CRM was still something that wasn't a Kleenex or a kind of brand name. It's okay, CRM, do we need that as a necessity? It's not today where it's just table stakes for every organization. Then the in the cloud part, the federal government had many mandates about things within the firewall and security. And the idea of this software as a service or cloud computing was, it was a scary thing. It was that in and of itself was the uphill battle. So more than anything, we were doing evangelizing of the technology, before we can get to the product, like what is cloud computing and why is this a model we think could benefit you? But yeah, it was hard. And if you've ever been in around the federal government, there's reseller networks, there are authority to operate, there are contract vehicles, obviously systems integrators, deployment practices, not to mention, obviously, the rigorous security and all that. So yeah, it was, I would say it was like a startup within a budding, soon to be $1 billion business. It was very hard, a lot of fun though.
I assume that it took a lot of resilience to break through and make it the big success with public sector that it is today.
Yeah. You think about it, it was like when I got there was one or two other guys that were on a sales team. Like my first deal there was like a $30K deal with some sub agency. And then those went to 300K, and then you got into 7 figures. And I think when I left there as an organization, the federal group was doing 7 and 8-figure deals. There was no army of people. It was like a lot of Navy SEALs. It was like, hey, okay, we got to take this stick and sharpen it into something sharp. We can go hunt. And so it's like, we had to make things up, make up marketing collateral and go find people to evangelize within the government. So it was really a ground up thing. I mean, you didn't realize at the time because it's just what we had to do to sell a new product. But yeah, it took a lot of adapting and just evolving on the fly. And to say it's chaotic was, I think, an understatement. But then you get those people that were champions of ours at the federal government, and you start to get some people coming over from other places from a sales perspective that kind of got it. And then that becomes a force multiplier when you get the right people there. That first year or two, it was definitely a grind.
Where did that resilience come from in you? What was it in your background that gave you the resilience?
At that point in my career, I just left Oracle, which to me was like the end all be all. Like, oh my God, this is the mothership. It's Oracle. And that was time when there was Siebel acquisition, PeopleSoft. It was an exciting time there. And I remember when I left, I had this little bit of a pit in my stomach. I remember it was like one or two people were like, what are you doing? I was like, you're leaving Oracle to go to this company that's probably going to go bankrupt, will never work, we'll probably acquire them in 10 months. And I'm not gonna lie, there was a minute I was like, I don't know, did I make a pretty big mistake? It was, again, in my mindset at whatever, 27 years old, whatever, it was survival. I was like, okay, this has got to work. There's no, hey, we're burning the ships behind us. There's no retreat. This has to work. So from that perspective, for me, I was like, there's no going back. Wow, did I just take a leap? Because again, that early in your career, you don't know. And I was like, did I just take a leap? That was a dumb move. And so for me, it was like, just failure is not an option. And truth be told, I knew very little about getting authority to operate and all these other things that were required, but you just fake it till you make it. And I think I've always been a big believer as an athlete. I wasn't like I didn't go anywhere on a full scholarship and play anywhere. But I think you can make up for pretty much everything with hustle and just outworking people. And so for me, it was just, we're just gonna hustle. And if you don't know something, we'll pretend, or we'll go find somebody in the organization who does know how to do something, or ask for help. Or for me, it was just, this was my opportunity to make a name and springboard my own career. So I was like, this can't fail. This can't fail. And again, Oracle was my second job in technology. So I was like, and I remember early on, recruiters say, 3 years, you got to be everywhere for 3 years. That was the benchmark. And for me, I was like, okay, this has got to work. We're going to find a way. So it's for me, just at least perceivably in my mind, survival at that point.
I think a lot of times some of the resilience for a lot of people came from their backgrounds in athletics. There's lots of other things it can come from as well. Would you point to that as one of the things that built resilience for you? Or were there other things when you were a young man that really, like, you were a high achiever in, that you really learned about resilience and persistence besides athletics?
For me, and I don't say this with ego or anything, but as a growing up, high school, stuff like that, I think academics just came not easy. I was by no means a 4.0 type student, and I didn't get 1600 on my SATs, something like that, but it wasn't a grind for me where, oh my God, I'm just scraping by with D's and C's. It came a little bit more easy. And sports stuff, again, I was never some phenomenal athlete. Again, no Division I or collegiate athlete, but I, growing up, played a little bit of everything. And I think, again, was able to be a decent athlete at kind of most things, but never great or exemplary at really any of them. And so I think when I got into college, things get hard. Things get a lot harder. And I think it was that point in my life where you learn a lot about yourself. You learn, okay, you're either going to fold or you're going to, because sometimes it's just, it has to come to you and you blossom. And for me, it was like college was like, okay, things aren't coming easy anymore. School's a lot harder. And so anything you're going to get, you have to go out and earn. And I think it was around that time frame when I just realized, I was like, okay, I am a worker. And for me, it was always, and it continues to be, just like the fear of quitting. Like sometimes I'll be like, God, it would be so easy to walk away, but it's just in your mind. It's absolutely not an option. And when something is not an option, that's why you hear me throw that out there, like burning the boats, that whole analogy, that story. But if it's not an option to quit and you have no retreat, it's okay, you'll figure it out. And I think that's true for everybody. It's just some people have the mentality. I think that resilience or grit or whatever really came to me in college when I realized, okay, this is going to take hard work, but then it's okay. Is there something that you want to achieve? And that why is different for everybody. For some people, it's, I want to buy the old family farm back. Some people, it's financial. For some people, and I think if that why is strong enough, I think that resilience is in everybody.
You've worked in organizations where 6, 7, and 8-figure deals are common. Being a salesperson in those companies, if you're good at it, can be extremely lucrative. But at some point you decided to make the jump to sales management. What were the reasons that you wanted to be in sales management instead of continue your career as a high-performing salesperson?
That's the $1 million question, literally. For me, I've always loved coaching, mentorship, teaching. And again, I think back in my whole life, just in very smaller areas that you don't realize until 20 years later, but it's always been a little bit of a passion of mine, and something that excites me and brings out passion is to play some small part in helping others get really good. And that could be getting someone out of bed early to make sure they go to the gym or something like that. Or it could be, hey, I don't know what to do as a career. You're in technology. Tell me why that's good. Okay, let me help. So I think I will tell you, it's self-serving and just makes you feel good. But I've always gotten a lot of fulfillment. And what really satisfies me professionally is seeing people, helping people achieve what I would say is the greatest years of their career, right? Now, that doesn't always happen, but the most honorable thing you can do is to get the best out of somebody else. And I think the other thing is that it's very hard. It's very hard. As a sales rep, and by the way, being a sales rep is great. I absolutely loved it. Once you master it, it's like you can go anywhere. And like you said, you can make a lot of money. I think leadership is so hard. It's very difficult because it's ever changing. There's always new problems. There's always new challenges. You have to adapt. You have to get better every day or you'll be old, stale, yesterday's news. And so the idea of pursuing something that's hard, I think it keeps you sharp. And I think really the last thing and probably the biggest thing for me, Lucas, is I just love being around people. I love working with good people. I love working for good people. Any company I've gone to, it's been because I believe in the leadership, trust the leadership. And I think that's always something I've tried to emulate, is to be somebody that people trust and want to go somewhere because they're inspired by. Helping people is really hard, but it's a lot. By a multiple of 10, it's more rewarding when you're able to orchestrate a team of people that find great success.
As you've made the transition into sales management, had a long and successful career building sales organizations, what have been some of the key insights that you've had around what it takes to build a high-performing sales team, an elite sales organization?
Here's what I'll say is anything I've learned has come from failing at it several times. And I think the most important lessons are learned in blood, right? You make mistakes that you're like, never again. And so everything I've learned, take it away, it's because I've screwed it up at some point. I had to bite the bullet and eat crow, so to speak. And you made mistakes. And leadership has been filled with great lessons. And the one thing I've learned, I think is probably at the foundation of it all, is it all starts with the people. Like it all starts with the people. And I think the first lesson you learn, I think it was one of my first bosses at Oracle said, when you get into leadership, it's like you have to make a turn. It's not like you're doing the same job. I'm a sales rep, but now I got to do it times 5 or 6. It's a completely different role. And so for me, it was a pivot, and you have to learn that you can't do the job of 6 people. So what do you need? I think the most important thing for me is you need the right people. It all starts with getting the right people. And what I've learned is that you can either win with the right people or you can die trying to make the wrong people the right people. And by the way, it doesn't mean good sales rep, bad sales rep. Sometimes there's people just in the wrong fit with an industry or a culture or a company or even myself. But I think sometimes like I said, I would much rather spend 5x the time getting the right people to walk into battle with because you'll spend 10x that time trying to coach up people for things that are unnatural. And so the number one thing I've learned is double down, triple down, spend all your time trying to get the right people, and the rest of the job becomes very easy. But
I'm curious, I want to get into kind of the nuances of this idea of the importance of finding the right people. I'm sure that you've had situations in your career where you've had someone on your team and you thought, this might not be the right person. And then somehow that's changed through coaching, through them realizing, it takes more out of me in order to succeed here. And so we've all seen those transitions before. How do you know when this is the wrong person on my team, or this is someone who has an opportunity, who's right now they're not doing the right things, but they have an opportunity to start doing the right things?
There's an element of trusting your gut. I think when you're able to trusting your gut, right? Like when you've seen this movie more than once. And what I mean by that is I think sometimes your gut's telling you to do one thing like, hey, this isn't working. This just doesn't feel right. But your mind is, okay, they have a big deal on the horizon. That could save the day. Or, hey, but they came from this competitor. They know this space. Like something's up. I think the reason, like the human reason, is because it is hard. Anyone says it's easy to just sever people. You're dealing with people's lives here. So moving on from people it's hard. It's a hard thing to do. And I think sometimes the human element gets in the way of that and you make excuses to not do that. But I will tell you, it was our chairman at Workday. I remember he said something. He's like, hiring and firing is the most important job. And if you're not comfortable getting rid of people, moving people out of the business, you will be moved out of the business. And it's true. Seen this firsthand, and it's the most important thing. So to answer your question, number one is really trust your gut. If your spidey sense is going off that, hey, this is not a fit, there's a reason. And dragging that out, it's absolutely crippling to a business.
What would you see that would made you think, all right, I'm not getting what I need from this person right now, but I see that I can get it. If we manage this the right way, things can change.
Sometimes if the pedigree is there and the coachability is there, and again, like we talked about the why, you asked me about resilience and grit. It's like sometimes, okay, how do you light that fire or know what is going to be, what's going to precipitate that grit and that fire? And I think if you can find that and hit on that, then you can actually observe, is he or she ready and willing and chomping at the bit to do the right thing? I'll give you an example. There was a rep early on in my career that was, when I moved into a certain role, was on the chopping block and just was, I think, had a little bit, probably about a year and a half. And people were like, okay, it's not working out. And so when I took over this team, I was like, literally, let's roll our sleeves up to the table and let's like sit side by side and work through these problems. And how are you attacking this big deal that you have in front of you? Literally whiteboarding. Okay, we're going to go do this. And here's the list of to-dos for this week. Like here's why, here's how we move the needle on this deal and this way. And let's break it out into minor steps. Okay, you're going to go away next week. We're going to review this, or on Wednesday, we're going to review this. And he was just boom, like not yesterday, not tomorrow, like in 2 hours. Hey, I've already reached out. And so it was this like hunger to be coached, and it became obvious that had never happened.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of different aspects of what, a good leader should do. And coaching is a massive piece of that. And it was quite obvious that the environment where we were in, there were leaders in place. They expect you to come in and know how to do those things. And that worked for some people, but for this individual, it just didn't fit, but it didn't mean he wasn't capable, didn't have the pedigree. So we did that for a year, Lucas. It was literally 3 times a week, sit down, just game plan. And then like those sessions got shorter and closer together because we were moving so rapidly. And fast forward, this guy closed a massive, I think it was one of the biggest we'd ever done in the company at the time, and changed his life. You're a millionaire and you've changed the trajectory of your life. And I think about that. And so it's this, you got to find a happy medium. There's that gut, but then it's sometimes, okay, we owe it to people and ourselves as leaders to go and actually pressure test that gut feeling, because you don't know until you roll up your sleeves, and you have to do the hard work of drilling into people and understanding what makes them tick.
A lot of times when it's gut, I know what the right answer is, but I don't know that I know what the right answer is. And so I think that a lot of times discussions like this can help us illuminate, what is it? How do I articulate it beyond the gut? And a couple of the things that I heard from you, that is, ask yourself about this person. Do they have the drive? Do they have the resilience? And do they have the coachability? And those questions are a way that you can take it beyond the gut. Do they have the industry experience? That's not a very good question. Did they used to be a good seller? That's not a very good question either. It's, do they have the coachability? Do they have the resilience? Do they have the drive? Those are the good questions. If the answer to those is yes, those are the things where it's, yes, I want to keep investing in this person. They could turn the corner.
That 100%. And that's why I think recruiting and hiring, for all the reasons we're talking about, they're of the utmost importance, because undoing a mistake. And it was when I was at Workday, I remember it was like one of our kickoff sessions for leadership. And it was like the cost of making a bad hire. It's okay. You ramp these people, takes another 3 quarters to realize they're not good. You offboard them. It was like $1 million, whatever it is. It was a large amount of money cost to the business of a bad hire. So it's of the utmost importance, recruiting. And I think, to your point, there was one of my rep that moved into first line leadership. He said, sometimes it's like horses for courses. Like you got the right person that knows how to sell to that account or whatever. And while there's truth to that in certain businesses, and probably maybe more mature businesses, I always will err on the side of, I don't mean literally, pedigree, someone that just has that and they can do the things that you can't coach, or it's just in their DNA or it's not, and then teach them the other stuff, as opposed to, let's talk about all the things that make my job as a leader easy, i.e., oh, you already know the product, know the industry's account. But the other stuff is going to rear its ugly head in worse ways. And I'll give you an example. When I was at Workday, it was, because again, we were selling ERP, HCM, payroll, but in a very new environment. It was a lot of early adopters of the SaaS delivery model. Because it's like Salesforce talking about cloud computing. It was like, now we're doing that with ERP, which was historically these mammoth types of deployments. Yeah. But we had hired a ton of people from ADP or Oracle. They had sold these HCM deals and ERP deals in the past. And so it's like, okay, they'll know how to do this. And by the way, a lot of people were uber successful. And there's hundreds of people that came from that were cut from that cloth and did very well. So I'm not saying that's not the right thing. However, one thing I actually hit it was a challenge for me is I just said, okay, great. I have to, because it was a space that was new to me. I was like, I can't teach ERP. I don't come from 10 years of doing this like a lot of people I had worked with. I was like, I got to go get people that know this and I can teach them the other stuff. And by the way, again, in some cases that was the case. But what I found more largely speaking was that wasn't the case. It wasn't the case. And the reason it had nothing to do with that was the wrong mentality or approach. It was that the skills, like the soft skills that were being used at those companies at that time didn't translate to the skills it took to sell Workday in that time. And so you think to yourself, okay, it wasn't, oh, we need to know how to sell payroll. We need to know how to sell HR, whatever the case may be. It was, we need people that can sell a disruptive mindset and take a consultative approach to delivering the business value of a new delivery model that's going to help them in all these other ways that are not on the check mark feature function list. And those were the skill sets I needed. And so I found then I made a couple of hires from Gartner, but like the more of a consultative background, and they did very well. I found that hiring people for the skills that they need to succeed at this role is the most important thing.
Part of what I'm hearing, tell me if I have this right, is that you're an incumbent. You need someone who can organize a process that you're going to go through the checklist and make sure you check all the boxes. And when you're the disruptor, you need someone who can convince the customer that they need to change their buying criteria. They need to be able to affect the buying criteria. And I think that probably includes traits like adaptability and emotional intelligence. I would say I've seen a lot of failures where it's like a person checks a bunch of the boxes, but they don't really check the like self-awareness, emotional intelligence box. And they end up like not being able to succeed because they're not aware of what's going on in the room sometimes.
Yeah. And these are things that you can interview for. These are the things that you can vet, but it's hard. Like it is hard. And I'll tell you, early on in my career, I made the mistake in leadership of kind of breezing through interviews and following gut a little bit more in the interview process. Like I would almost say, for me at least, I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but like in the interview process, gut is something almost like I don't want to trust because, and again, having taken a lot of classes on interviewing, there's inherent bias in just, hey, you went to the same school I went to, or you like the same team that I root for as a kid, whatever the case may be. There are psychological reasons you latch onto people that necessarily don't make sense. And so sometimes trusting your gut is not the best thing. And I would say actually Workday did a phenomenal job of outlining how to interview with science. And it was a real good learning opportunity as a leader of like, how do you actually interview for the competencies that are going to make this individual successful here? And the one thing that I've found is when you're interviewing someone, tell me exactly how this deal went down. Because salespeople sell for a living. So everyone knows the textbook answer. Oh, I love to prospect. I love to do this. And qualification's so important. Everyone knows the textbook answer. But what I found is if you say, hey, tell me a story, tell me how you did this. Like what was important to you? Walk me through, what was her name? Oh, and how did it go when the presentation didn't go bad? What did you do? And what did your SC do? When you get in the weeds, you can quickly root out he or she owned this process and made mistakes and or they're just telling a story. And I found interviewing for the competencies along the ride and having them actually talk about exactly what they've done, it helps, I think, tremendously. And it's helped me, I think, avoid some mistakes and probably find some really good gems that otherwise I would have just.
I totally agree. I think if you're asking a salesperson, how would you prospect into an account that was very difficult to prospect into? There's a lot of salespeople who can answer that question who have never done it before. And so you want to ask them, tell me about a time that you prospected into an account that was really difficult to prospect into and get in those real stories about how it's happened before, and not just give them 3 minutes to tell the story, but be ready with lots of follow-up questions, 10 minutes where you can really get into the details of the story and see whether they've done it before or whether they've read about it on the internet.
That's exactly right. And I'll tell you what, one thing I'll say, lesson I learned at Sprinklr was I spent hours in the interview process. Whereas admittedly, early in my career, we had a 1 hour interview. I like you. So let's do this. Come on board. And I spent hours over multiple sessions. When you get on the phone, you're like, I got 2 more questions. I really want to drill into that area. We're going to set up more time until we are both really sure that we will spend hours because you're getting married. You're getting married at work. It's hard to get divorced at work. So you want to make sure you're going as eyes wide open, and both sides too. I like to really be uber transparent with, I don't really try to sell candidates. You want to get people excited about the opportunity, because if you don't believe it, you're not excited, they're not going to, of course. I think I give people the good, bad, and the ugly, right? Because I want you to vet us and me as much as I'm vetting you.
This is an area I have a slightly different philosophy on it than you. I think that what I prefer to do is to spend extra time on the interview design ahead of time so that I'm not left with questions afterwards. And hey, if there's like a couple of crucial questions, like I'm not sure, then I definitely want to look into those. I'm not saying I don't. I think Google's research on interviews is that after the fourth interview, each additional interview has like less than a 1% chance of changing your hiring decision. So when you have that fifth conversation, that sixth conversation, that seventh conversation, all you're really doing is making yourself more comfortable with the decision. You're not actually changing your decision. And so now sometimes there is something that you really need the answer to. So I'm not saying never, but generally what I want to do is I want to invest a lot of time on the interview design up front so that I'm going to get everything covered in those 4 interviews and not have to drag the process out for too long. One other idea that was very tied into things that we've been talking about that I wanted to share. My friend Waylon McGill, one of the things he says is like, hey, if you you interview one more person or 5 more people, you spend 1 more week before you give that job offer, and you find someone who's 10% better, it might seem like that's not that big of a deal. Like it's better to just have the person in seat. But when you really think about that person who's 10% better, it's not just that they're going to sell 10% more. They're going to learn more from the customer. They're going to teach more to the rest of the team. And it's going to compound to something like really huge over time. And so being patient to really find the right person is something that's like really underrated. And the impact that we have is like very easy to underestimate. It really becomes gigantic over time.
I couldn't agree more. There's one thing, it was like one of the Jocko Willink books, but it talks about, he's like, I don't want to be the leader like at the front that's just everyone has to follow constantly. He's like, I want everyone on the team to be a leader. He's like, if you got 5 leaders, your job becomes very easy. And so interviewing for people that are, there's a cultural fit. And that's people throw that term around a lot, culture, but what is culture? But I think when you have leaders at every level, regardless of title, leadership has nothing to do with title. I think it makes your job easier. And I think when you get in like a second line role, that becomes even more important. Is like, how do you create more force multipliers at every level? Because it's hard if you have one leader in role. It's if you have people. And again, you see them naturally show themselves. Everyone's been on a team, like, oh my God, she's amazing. She's clearly like our unofficial team lead. Everyone follows her once she's killing her number. But then how can you go and create more? Like, how do you go and develop people into being leaders within their team, within their ecosystem, with the supporting functions? And that's when I think you get very highly performing teams. That takes a lot of work. But when you get to that point, the work does itself a little bit. And so I think we talk a little bit about one thing. I'm a big believer in inspiring. I think it's one of the most important things you can do, because I think inspiring your people is about transferring a little bit of your belief so that they can translate what that impact means to them, and obviously show that excitement so they can start to open themselves up to coaching. And so I think when you get the right people, then they're much more easy to inspire others and those around them. And when you find a team that's very inspired about what they're doing, I use that term, not like Vince Lombardi quotes and whatever the case may be, but for me, like the inspiration is, why are we doing this? Why are we here? Why are we at Salesforce or Workday or Sprinklr or whatever? Why do we believe there's no better place in the industry to be other than here right now? Market opportunity, your accounts. Are you inspired about the account? Are you inspired about your financial upside, what it does for your family? Whatever the case may be, if you're inspired, that means you believe what you're doing, and you can't fake that. That's not something that you can feign. And if you're trying to fake as a leader, you're in the wrong position in terms of leadership, and you're buying the wrong company. And so I think it all starts with inspiration, because if people believe, then everyone is open to being coached. Everyone's open to being coached. They're like, that's where I want to get. You're telling me this vision, like we can go to this place and you can help me get to my goals. Tell me how to get there. And then it leads to that logical next step, which is coaching. And I think then, and only then, do you get the opportunity to go and inspect the business. And unfortunately, I think, and one thing I did learn at Sprinklr, these are all things that everyone knows, but the one thing I did learn at Sprinklr from our CRO was that like, it is a linear process. You have to inspire in order to be able to coach and have someone receive coaching and absorb. And then once you coach them, you've earned the right to inspect. But too often people do it the other way around. And that becomes, it's ineffective, I think. And it leads to a lot of cliches about just sales and sales leadership and management. But I think, again, if people are being coached, you've earned the right to inspect. And then you can inspect, hey, here's a gap, here's a hole, here's an opportunity for you. Here's a gap, but it's an opportunity to get incrementally better. And then guess what? The whole cycle starts over and then you inspire again. And here's what you close this gap. Here's the opportunity you have if we can work on this skill. Imagine what it would do for you. Inspiration starts all over again. That cycle starts all over again. And then, okay, you buy in, you believe, I believe, you believe, great. Here's how we get there. You coach them up. And then it goes around this cycle. And I learned that there is a very logical reason you do these things in this order.
I love it.
Yeah.
I wasn't planning on sharing this, but it came up a lot today around how to do data-driven, repeatable, scientific hiring. I'm teaching a class for Pavilion University on that starting April 3rd. Signups are available now for it. And so that's something I want our listeners to know about. I think the stuff that you're talking about in Inspire, coaching, and inspecting, I think we could do another episode on that at some point in the future. But when you think about the things that we've talked about today, what's one or two takeaways that you'd have for our listeners in terms of key points that they should really consider?
The number one thing is be relentless about getting the right people, relentless about looking for the right people. Recruiting should be always on. You want to get those right people. They take 9 months to get. And it takes a relentless level of grit to go and find and retain people. But every success I've had as a leader was 100% attributed to my people. And every failure I've had has been on me, putting the wrong people in a wrong position or not doing the right thing. So it's 100% comes down to people. Be relentless about how you manage your time, specifically day by day, week over week, to enable those people, get them, like you said, not performing they are or out, or whether it's recruiting new people, but literally hours and hours. And the vast majority of your time each week should be recruiting and developing, retaining, ramping up new sellers. It's really all about the people. Everyone gets wrapped around the axle and Salesforce, this and that, and hygiene and all that, which is all good, but like you get the right people, the job is easy.
And where can our listeners find you online?
My LinkedIn profile.
LinkedIn is great. John Pellett on LinkedIn. A couple of my takeaways are, I really liked that when you said at the beginning is getting the best out of someone is hard. It's very hard and it's challenging. And a lot of times we don't really know it until we've made the mistakes ourselves. And there are some of these things that it's really hard if you don't go through those learnings. And I think it takes resilience. It takes being able to identify resilience in others. It takes having a structured method of looking for resilience and emotional intelligence and drive and coachability in others in order to find the right team. So I think those are some great takeaways from our conversation today. If you enjoyed this episode of Building Elite Sales Teams, please leave us a review in your podcast app. You can find more of our content online at yardstick.team/blog. If you have any feedback for us, you can connect with me on LinkedIn. As I mentioned before, got a Pavilion class coming up in April. If you're a Pavilion member, love to have you join. If you're not, check it out. It's a great organization. And thanks for being with us today.